Okay, remember that they are changing my voice. Here I am in Downtown Gilroy, okay, and I'm going to be discussing some scriptures about the flashing sword. The flashing sword that Moses spoke about. The sword with the martial power of God, the martial arts power of God, the warrior spirit of God. Hosea 11 verse 5. Will they not return to Egypt, and will not Assyria rule over them because they refuse to repent? A sword will flash in their cities. It will devour their false prophets and put an end to their plans. So why will the sword flash? Because they refuse to repent. So it's the sword of God's vengeance, God's martial vengeance. And Horus is known as the Avenger. So what the Egyptians were trying to describe was something similar as is being described in the Bible. And in its pure form, it's the same thing. It's not a question of whether or not it's right to swell up with righteous indignation and do martial arts. Okay, it's about having it right. It's about serving God so that you're truly in the spirit of divine vengeance. It goes on to say, my people are determined to turn from me, even though they call me God Most High. I will by no means exalt them. So why won't he exalt them? Because they refuse to repent. And just like we see in life, right, time is a very significant idea. People only have so much time before they die. How much time has passed since the beginning of the Bible? How much time has passed since scientists say that the first humans came into being? Timing and what have you. We see in Proverbs 17:2, I believe it says, a prudent servant will rule over a disgraceful son and will share in the inheritance as one of the family. We see also in Hosea, it says, the people of Samaria must bear their guilt because they have rebelled against their God. They will fall by the sword. Their little ones will be dashed to the ground. Their pregnant women ripped open. How? Spiritually speaking. It's figuratively speaking. Because they didn't come into the spirit of righteousness, their children were profane. Their offspring were profane because they ran out of time. If one doesn't do what is precisely right in time, then that's it for them. And they go off to eternal disgrace. Having failed God, having failed the righteous, having failed their families. And so we see, when we go to Habakkuk 2, it talks about unjust gain and bringing a shame, disgracing their house, which is their formation, their spiritual formation of their families, of those who come together in the same spirit. So Habakkuk makes his complaint. He says, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. What answer he's supposed to receive for the complaint, what answer he's supposed to convey. The Lord's answer. Well, keep in mind the complaint was about the wicked seeming to get away with what they're doing. Habakkuk is a short book with like 3 chapters where God responds to the prophet Habakkuk explaining why the wicked aren't actually getting away, why they're not living a worthwhile life, and then they're going to hell. Then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, the enemy is puffed up, his desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied, he gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the peoples. Will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. How long must this go on? It's like the government. They refuse to admit there's various forms of extortion. You don't have to be in the mafia to extort people. It's the policies. It's the cultures. It's things like this that give it away. Who, what, when, where, how, why? Very important questions to ask. Will not your creditors suddenly arise? Will they not wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their prey, because you have plundered many nations. The peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed human blood, you have destroyed land and cities and everyone in them. Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many peoples, shaming your house and forfeiting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. Think Cain and Abel, right? Their actions have caused the environment, the land, the spiritual place to cry out against them. Nature has responded to their treachery by saying what they're doing is wrong, to the point where there must be punishment on their souls. And the mind, body, soul, and spirit in certain ways is connected. For example, you could go into a coma and you still have a good spirit. But if you purposely do things that are wicked, it rots your soul. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Now, this is very key, especially in Western nations, right? What happens when you build a nation, a city, a town, a state with bloodshed and injustice, and you so-called establish it? No one can be truly established in wickedness. So they claim to be established by God, but they're actually established in wickedness. So you see the connection between the stolen goods, the unjust gain, and building the city with bloodshed and injustice, the various forms of injustice, instead of being determined to be moral and to have the moral conviction necessary to have established it correctly. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so that they can gaze on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink and let your nakedness be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover you. The disgrace will cover your glory. So, as you see, when people rebel against the morally precise order of God, the Royal African Falcon top martial arts order, and again, I'm not racist, I don't care about race, it just happens to be what it is, that there's a certain shame that permeates them in their houses and their nations and their families and their endeavors. There's a certain failure that comes over them because they refuse by their actions to acknowledge that the throne is established in righteousness, not in mere human rules, customs, and traditions, not in racial preference, but in righteousness. In Habakkuk 3:4, we see it says, his splendor was like the sunrise, rays flashed from his hand where his power was hidden. So we see in his hand that the power is hidden. We see earlier that a sword will flash on the cities of the wicked, and it will devour their false prophets and put an end to their plans. We see in Habakkuk 3:9, it says, you uncovered your bow, you called for many arrows, you split the earth with rivers, the mountains saw you and writhed, torrents of water swept by. And it talks about how the waves and the sun and the moon stood still at the glint of God's flying arrows, at the lightning of his flashing spear. So why is his spear described as flashing? And in Nahum, I believe it's described as a glittering spear, a flashing sword, a flashing spear. Because the word spirit and the phrase spear, it are connected. Speaking of Nahum, let me just go over and skip some of my notes here and let's get to Nahum 3. Woe to Nineveh. Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. The crack of whip, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses and jolting chariots, charging cavalry, flashing swords and glittering spears. Many casualties, piles of dead, bodies without number, people stumbling over corpses, all because of the wanton lust of a prostitute, alluring, the mistress of sorceries, who enslaved nations by her prostitution and peoples by her witchcraft. So what is it talking about? It's not talking about literal weapons. It's talking about the weapons of God through the supernature, the essence of nature, the supernatural. That God's vengeance was automatically brought on them because they're wicked. And wickedness burns like a fire. So it talks about charging Calvary, the spirit in which they're charging. Flashing swords, the spirit in which the sword is wielded. The spirit in which it was given and the spirit in which it's received. It's talking about the casualties of their souls. And it was the witchcraft that brought it on them. The witchcraft of the churches, of the different pagan groups, the witchcraft of the scientists, technology, psychology, chemistry. So I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty. I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. I will pelt you with filth. I will treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle. All who see you will flee from you and say, Nineveh is in ruins. Who will mourn for her? Where can I find anyone to comfort you? Are you better than Thebes, situated on the Nile, with water around her? Excuse the background noise. I had to turn the page. Let's just make this part